And for sure, we have more questions than we do answers, but I still think that it's a topic worth exploring. Okay, so disclaimer, the information in this webinar is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical conditions. It's meant for educational purposes only, and you're recommended to consult with practitioners involved in your care before making any lifestyle changes. So the agenda, we're going to cover exactly what is fasting, a look at the historical perspective on fasting, some of the therapeutic applications, and addressing some of the misinformation surrounding the many practices of fasting, and then a little Q&A as time permits. All right, so I find this a little distracting. So fasting is simply choosing to abstain from eating for either personal reasons, religious reasons, health reasons. You choose when to stop, you choose when to start. There's no defined starting or end points, and it's simply the absence of eating, and we've been doing it for millennia. Finally, it's simple and it's ambiguous. You're either eating or you're not. And we've been doing it for as long as we've been in existence. Historically, during hunter-gatherer days, it was something that our ancestors did on a regular basis because there was often food scarcity. They didn't know when their next meal was going to be available. And then as we go through our historical timeline, fasting was also undertaken by a lot of religious practices. And today, actually in the last probably 15 years, fasting is now being looked at as a way to address many of the underlying chronic conditions that we wind up suffering from in this country. So again, historically, we didn't eat 6 small meals a day. We didn't eat 3 times a day. We were perhaps lucky if we ate 3 times in a month because meals were literally catch as catch can. Fasting was really the norm. The hunter-gatherers actually had a heightened sense of alertness and acuity as a result of fasting in order for them to be able to catch their prey. So we almost look at fasting as a means of adaptation. We were self-selected to be able to fast. Were that not the case, we wouldn't be humans would not be in existence today. As back far, actually, in the 1600s, philosophers used fasting to kind of step into that next level of awareness and a connection with their universe. Plato said that he fasted for greater physical and mental efficiency, and fasting was often referred to as the physician within. So fast forward to more present day. 1946, we have the Journal of Nutrition publishing the first study on fasting, showing that rats that were deprived of food every 3rd day lived longer and were less likely to develop tumors than the control animals. In 2003, an experiment by Mark Mattson, who's a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins, found that mice fed on alternate days, so every other day fasting, were healthier than mice that were calorie restricted by 40%. So forever, many people have followed calorie restricted diets. And what this study demonstrated was that alternate day fasting was actually more effective in weight loss and maintaining weight loss than a reduced calorie diet, which is what, again, for those of us who grew up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, calorie restricted diets were kind of the norm. So in 2012, the idea of fasting was popularized by a BBC program by Michael Mosley. It aired, you're still able to access this on YouTube, so I think it might be an interesting listen. From the documentary, there was a best-selling book called Fast Exercise, and my current favorite modern-day author, scientist, physician is Jason Fung, who is a nephrologist in Canada who wrote The Complete Guide to Fasting. He also wrote the Obesity Code. For anybody who's interested, it's a fascinating read, a fascinating audiobook. and he is all things fasting. He's treated thousands of patients in his clinic up in Canada, reversing type 2 diabetes in as little as 2 weeks using this approach. And yet, it's such a foreign concept to many of us today. And why do we think that is? That wasn't really the case up until the 1950s, when our food intake, the messages that we received, and our food supply began to change drastically. Because the fact is that we have over 40,000 calories worth of stored energy at our disposal at any point in time. And yet we are hard pressed to go without a meal. It's often I've heard around our home that I haven't eaten 6 breakfasts, or I haven't had anything to eat since lunch, when in fact, we're not going to starve. We have ample supply of stored energy and stored body fat to help us survive extended lengths of time without food. And if we did the math, if somebody, say, had 20 pounds to lose, if there are 3,500 calories that are able to be burned in 1 pound of fat, if somebody had 20 pounds to lose, that would be 3,500 times 20 in terms of calories that are stored on the body at any point in time. So we may feel a little hungry, but we are certainly not going to starve. So some of the other health messages that have actually missed the mark and were not based in science, and for all things in terms of changing lifestyle, we want evidence-based recommendations. These, of course, were not. The first being that we must break the fast within 45 minutes of waking, or our metabolism is going to go in the tank. The second one, if we miss a meal, we will slow our metabolism. Also, skip the science, not based in fact. A third, we need to eat small, frequent meals spread throughout the day to stabilize mood, blood sugar levels, and energy levels. Also not the case. Again, at any point in time, we have 40,000 calories worth of stored energy at our disposal. It's just a matter of mobilizing it. And the fourth one that really gets my goat is that in order to lose weight, we need to eat less and move more. Also, not evidence-based, not based in fact, and is actually part of the myth information of weight loss. This graph actually assumes that a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. And what I hope will become clear as we go through the presentation is that all calories are not created equal. So it isn't sufficient to eat less and move more in order to lose weight. If that were actually the case, we wouldn't have any of the weight regain that we saw on the Biggest Loser television show. People who lost hundreds of pounds only to gain them back. I have never heard of a population who has worked harder, exercised more for such lengths of time, and eaten so few calories and yet gained the weight back. If a calorie was a calorie is a calorie. If we exercised more and ate less, then we would not see the results that we did with some of the participants in that television show. Other messages that missed the mark. Starting with the 4 food groups back in the 1950s. This is actually one of the original charts. Again, 4 food groups, the healthy food pyramid, which actually had us consuming 60% of our calories in terms of carbohydrates with all of the 9 to 11 servings of grains, also missed the mark, also not based in science. There are probably agendas that were being driven, political, through the food industry, but none of these were based in science. There were actually no nutritional scientists sitting on the USDA at the time that these 2 graphics were developed. Okay, and then we have kind of the infamous now, Ansel Keys was a Harvard researcher who was, more towards the end of his career, was the physician who was putting forth the idea that fat was bad, fat made us fat, and cholesterol caused heart disease. The Time magazine cover in 1984 actually also got it wrong, because what we know today is that cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Inflammation is the root cause of heart disease. Frank Hugh and Walter Willett of Harvard School of Public Health in 2001 wrote that it's now increasingly recognized that the low-fat diet campaign has been based on little scientific evidence and may have caused unintended health consequences. The simple solution would be fasting. The unintended health consequences were, oh, and actually I'll go to the next slide. If we're not, when they took fat out of many of the foods that we were consuming in the 70s and 80s, think fat-free snack rolls, fat-free Entenmann's, think fat-free salad dressings, everything fat-free. It felt like manna from heaven. During that time period, people's, the rates of diabetes, the rates of obesity, the rates of heart disease all went up. What actually wound up tanking were people's HDL or good cholesterol. So it was message received and damage done. In 2013, we have the PREDIMED study, which actually compared the high-fat Mediterranean diet to a low-fat diet. And the conclusion at the time was, and still is today, that the high-fat Mediterranean type approach, is much more beneficial to cardiovascular health as opposed to low-fat. And then in 1999, we have the cover of Time magazine actually kind of recanting the previous cover and getting it right. The other issue that I think, again, I'm targeting baby boomers here. Growing up, well, actually, this is more current day. Growing up, early on, we ate 3 meals a day. We didn't eat anything before dinner because we would be ruining our dinner. The kids today, they are eating small, frequent meals. They are snacking, between breakfast and lunch and dinner, and after school. And the food industry has followed suit with 100-calorie packs and little snack packs, and they make it very easy and convenient for us to grab something and eat it throughout the day. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, recess was recess. We would go outside to play. You may recognize some of these games between hopscotch and foursquare. We played wall ball. We played red light, green light. We were outside moving. Kids today, their recess is really more like snack time. It's like they can't go without a meal between breakfast and lunch, and then lunch and then after school. And when we have, when my girls would be playing sports after school, there was a snack mom or dad, and they would be bringing the snacks at the halftime in the game. Why children can't get through a soccer game without having all of this stuff to eat at halftime and then after the game is really beyond me. So if we take a look at, now we're going to transition to the therapeutic applications of fasting and for disease management and disease prevention. So this was actually taken, this slide here was taken from the New England Journal of Medicine. Intermittent fasting improves many chronic illnesses, including obesity, insulin resistance, high cholesterol, hypertension, and inflammation. And this is a graphic from Sachidananda Panda, Associate Professor of Regulatory Biology at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in San Diego. And here we see actually at a cellular level what's going on when we fast. There's an increase in cellular turnover, which is called autophagy, which we'll discuss in just a couple minutes. We also have a significant amount of appetite control. There's a stabilization of blood sugar. There's improvements in cardiovascular function. Intermittent fasting or extended fasting actually helps to improve the efficacy of many chemotherapies by sensitizing ourselves to the effect of the chemo. And as we also see in terms of metabolic rate, fasting actually improves a person's metabolic rate as opposed to slowing down somebody's metabolic rate, comparable to starving. So at its core, fasting is about managing insulin levels. And we're going to talk a lot about insulin levels over the next couple of slides. Insulin is a regulatory hormone. It's a signaling hormone in the body that has very many roles. The role that we are most familiar with is moving glucose from the blood into the tissues so that it can be burned for energy. Insulin is also present in a fed state as opposed to a fasted state. So when we're eating, our body responds by releasing insulin because it senses that food or an energy source is coming in, and it needs to determine what should be done with that energy source. Insulin is in fact an energy storage hormone. When insulin is elevated, it signals to the body that there's plenty of energy around, and it's going to store what it can in the form of body fat and burn what it's able to in terms of blood glucose that might be floating around. So to better explain, anytime we eat a meal, especially a mixed meal, insulin is triggered. This is a graph which depicts the insulin response to certain macronutrients such as carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And what we see is that carbohydrates, which are these purple dots, actually present with a rise in glucose pretty quickly, a rise in blood sugar levels quickly, very soon after eating, and there would be a concomitant increase in insulin as a result of this increase in blood sugar. Proteins and fats, on the other hand, don't consuming proteins in a similar blood sugar spike. Proteins and fats do result in some rise in blood sugar, but nothing compared to eating carbohydrates. And again, just for clarification, these are 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is the insulin response as a result of eating those meals. So when we eat breakfast, insulin goes up as blood sugar is elevated. Many of our typical breakfasts are comprised of carbohydrates like bagels and cereal and toast and waffles, etc. Insulin levels go up. Insulin levels come back down as we begin to digest and absorb the carbohydrate content of the meal. And then in between, we see a drop in insulin until we eat our next meal at lunchtime, when we see the rise in insulin. And again, we go through the day until we have our overnight fasting period, which for many people is an 8 to 10 hour time frame when our body goes into the fasting mode and insulin levels are greatly reduced. Now, insulin, I mentioned before, is really one of the targets or the benefits of intermittent fasting in terms of regulating insulin levels. Some of the dangers of having too much insulin in circulation include impacts on the brain in terms of neuropsychiatric and neurocognitive diseases, in terms of the GI tract, an increase in inflammation, endocrine, cancer, bone osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, an increase in autoimmune conditions. All of these have their root in inflammation that's tied to our diet and lifestyle, in particular, our eating frequently and our eating high carbohydrate meals frequently. So as kind of a general summary, when we're in the fed state, we've just consumed a meal or a snack. Our insulin levels are high, glucose levels are high. We're burning glucose as a primary fuel because it's so abundant, and we're storing fat. If we're not moving to burn the glucose that we're eating, any excess is going to be stored as fat. In the fasted state, because there's nothing to trigger insulin, insulin levels are low, glucose levels are low. Because insulin is a fat storage hormone, if insulin is low, we're actually able to liberate fat stores, and we're burning fat for fuel. So again, insulin is a fat storage hormone. If insulin is high, it's telling our body that it's okay to hold on to our fat stores because there's plenty of energy that's found elsewhere. So our goal, one of the great benefits of fasting is lowering serum insulin levels so that we can burn our body fat for fuel. So again, with the issue of elevated glucose and elevated insulin, the solution is fasting. Fasting stops insulin resistance when calorie restriction does not. When people begin kind of the trajectory that leads to type 2 diabetes, one of the problems is that they're making too much insulin. There's too much insulin that's circulating in the blood. When insulin is around for a long time, think 6 small meals a day, high carbohydrate meals, insulin levels are going to be elevated. Our body develops what's termed insulin resistance. The insulin stops being quite so effective. So our blood sugar then begins to stay high as our insulin levels stay high. And with that, with those two things happening at the same time, we're also going to be holding on to body fat. We won't be able to mobilize our body's fat stores. That's what precedes the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. So a recent study in the World Journal of Diabetes found that subjects with type 2 diabetes mellitus implementing short-term daily intermittent fasting significantly reduced body weight, fasting glucose, and improved post-meal glucose variability. And this is what Jason Fung works with. A single 24-hour fast, one 24-hour fast per week led to a 50% reduction in medications for type 2 diabetics. This might be one 24-hour fast a week for 8 weeks, a 50% reduction in medications. That's pretty outstanding. It's pretty powerful. And it's actually kind of turning the tide of us relying on medications to fix the body when a simple 24-hour, so that might be going from dinner to dinner. That's one 24-hour fast. Doing that once a week, maybe on a day that you are super busy and have a lot of errands to run or a lot of yard work to do, led to a 50% reduction in medications. That's some powerful medicine. In terms of aging, compared to normal mice on intermittent fasting regimens showed less age-related deterioration of neurons and fewer symptoms of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, and Huntington's disease. Human studies on calorie-restricted diets find similar neurological benefits of mental clarity and increased neuronal connections. So whether we're intermittent fasting or calorie restricted, it's those fasting levels of signaling compounds that actually help to improve those age-related declines in cognition, memory, etc. So fasting improves cognitive function and helps to boost brain power. Fasting allows your brain to recycle cellular components and repair themselves for optimal function. It increases a brain protein called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which interacts with parts of the brain that control learning, memory, and cognition. And finally, ketones easily cross the blood-brain barrier, feeding the brain, resulting in better mental acuity, energy, and productivity. Ketones are the breakdown ketones are when we mobilize body fat as an energy source. Those free fatty acids are transported to the liver and ketones are produced. Ketones are a very powerful fuel source that can be used throughout the body and also used for brain for energy metabolism. And it's those ketones that actually have the incredible clinical effect. In terms of heart health, and this was Mark Twain, a little starvation can really do more for the average sick man than can the best medicines and the best doctors. Now, I'll take a little issue with Mark Twain, and I'm going to say present company excluded, because the physicians at Lown Cardiovascular are some of the best anywhere in the country. But I think what this speaks to is that, I don't think that it's fair to rely on physicians to fix us, to heal us. I think, it's a partnership. We need to do what we can, not just to make them look good and to be successful, but because we own part of this health journey as well. And fasting, as an incredibly powerful tool, makes everything that follows work better. So this was a study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 8 weeks of alternate day fasting. So that might be, well, so that was the every other day 24-hour fast. Total cholesterol was reduced by 21%. LDL cholesterol was reduced by 25%. Triglycerides dropped by 32%, and systolic blood pressure decreased from 124 millimeters of mercury to 116. Powerful, powerful impact. Autophagy, I mentioned this earlier, more towards the beginning of the talk. This physician was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2016 for being able to explain what autophagy does and its health benefits. On the next slide, autophagy is basically, as it sounds, it's self-eating self. So autophagy is the breakdown or the clearinghouse of cells in our body that have passed their prime. Normal cells grow, divide, and engage in usual cell functions, but as the cell ages, as anything ages, growth ceases and the cell becomes intent on internal cleaning. Imagine you're renovating your bathroom and you want to replace the sink and you might want to replace the tub. You're going to take out the old parts and replace them with new parts. That's essentially what autophagy does. It's a clearinghouse of cells that are damaged or impacted by aging in some way, shape, or form. So by clearing out, imagine the dead and dying cells, your body can renew, and it actually renews tissues and organs as this cleaning process happens during a fast. So this is what happens, or it can begin to happen during an overnight fast or during a 24-hour fast. Our body kind of steps into this phase of autophagy and actually begins the healing process. And it's very powerful. These are just some of the other health implications of autophagy or what benefits by autophagy. It slows down the aging process. It helps with infectious disease, fatty liver, type 2 diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases. Think about the beta amyloid plaque that builds up in the brain of patients with Alzheimer's disease. That's excess protein. That too can be impacted by the practice or the process of autophagy and or fasting, the practice of fasting. In terms of many cancer diagnoses, we know that damaged DNA is kind of a precursor to many cancer diagnoses and tumor formations. Autophagy also helps to rid the body of that damaged DNA before it can have any of those downstream effects. Glucose, insulin, and proteins turn off autophagy, while fasting is the strongest stimulus to autophagy currently known. So when we eat, our body is not in that phase of autophagy. It's when we're fasting and when we do more extended fasting that our body makes best use of autophagy. So some of the myth information regarding fasting, the first being that fasting slows your metabolism. In fact, fasting actually increases your metabolism because of counter-regulatory hormones like insulin, like human growth hormone, and some of the adrenal hormones, which actually act to improve our metabolism. And again, remember the 40,000 calories worth of stored energy, and that's for the average person. So there's no end or limit to the amount of energy that we actually can access during a fast. Fasting makes you lose muscle, when in fact muscle is preserved until body fat becomes so low, less than 4%, that the body has no choice but to turn to muscle. So in effect, fasting is one of the most potent stimuli for growth hormone secretion, which helps increase lean muscle mass. So when we fast, our body is actually looking forward to replacing and building the proteins that we've lost and growing muscle. And the other thing to consider is that we don't gain muscle by eating protein, we gain muscle by exercising. And certainly we get more muscle growth and exercise gains when we exercise in a fasted state because of this growth hormone that's released. Fasting causes low blood sugar. Again, we have most of us have an infinite supply of energy at any point in time. And we know that there are glycogen stores that are found in the liver and in the muscle. There's about 2,000 calories worth. Glycogen is stored carbohydrate, it's stored sugar. The body has over 2,000 calories worth of stored carbohydrate in the form of glycogen in both the muscle and the liver. So in order to tap into that stored body fat, our body is able to move through the liver, the storage forms of glycogen in the liver and the muscle. Then we have the fatty acids that our body releases. This is a very basic graphic of a fatty acid. This is a glycerol backbone or a carbohydrate backbone. So this too is another source of glucose should the body need it. And again, the brain thrives on ketones, which are those breakdown products of stored fat. 75% of the brain's energy needs can be met by these ketones. Ketones also happen to be super anti-inflammatory, which is why fasting at its core is anti-inflammatory. It's also why fasting has so many therapeutic benefits, because all of those chronic illnesses that we wind up suffering from, again, have their root in inflammation. So fasting is a pretty brilliant way that the body is able to manage some of the downstream consequences of a diet and lifestyle that are so inflammatory. Fasting also helps to regulate satiety and hunger hormones. We become more sensitive to those hormones as we step into fasting, so we don't have the highs and lows of glucose and blood sugar that are stimulating the kind of that hangry feeling that we get. Our blood sugars are much more stable. We're relying on body fat as that very steady source of energy throughout the day. So in fact, repeated fasting actually helps to control hunger and satiety. So again, in a nutshell, some of the advantages of fasting: it's convenient, it's powerful, doesn't cost you anything, it's very flexible, you can fast, you don't have to fast, it works with any diet, it's wheat-free, it's dairy-free, it's lacto-ovo. If you have dental issues, no problem, and it works with any blood type. We do need to consider some of the safety issues of anybody who is intending on stepping into fasting. Anybody with a disordered eating or is severely underweight, anybody who's pregnant or breastfeeding, anybody with a history of anemia, blood pressure or blood sugar irregularities, or if somebody develops weakness or fatigue. Again, this is why it's important to loop in any of the practitioners that you're working with in order to do it safely and have it be effective. So thank you for listening, and it's your turn. Any questions or good banter?
This is great, Beth. Thank you so much. I am collecting the questions. So there are a lot of questions that have come through in the chat that I will relay, and people, please feel free to add questions to the chat now, or if you raise your hand on the Zoom screen, you can ask it live. But wow, thanks. Very provocative, fact-filled, science-filled talk. Thought-provoking. A couple of questions with the same theme.
Mm-hmm.
Is, if it's so good for you, why does it feel so crummy? So I feel shaky if I exercise on an empty stomach. Someone says, why can't I concentrate when I miss a meal? I know I personally feel headachy for the rest of the day, even if I just... Yeah. So what's going on there? Why is that that it's not working, or do you get used to that?
No. So I also believe that the body has infinite wisdom. I think if we take the time to listen to what the body's trying to tell us, we will know the way. In terms of and those are brilliant questions, and those are real side effects that some people experience. If I was inviting, or if somebody was coming to see me who wanted to step into intermittent fasting, I would do it in a very gradual, stepwise process. So remember, and again, I apologize for how quickly I went through this, but if somebody is stepping into fasting, we want to have them get through that initial phase where they're mobilizing the glycogen stores or carbohydrate stores. So people who grew up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s grew up as carbohydrate burners, because we had the food industry, we had the waffles and the bagels and the crackers and the chippies, and everything was carb-based. So we evolved to be fat burners. That's how we survived. That's how we were self-selected. And we then became carbohydrate burners beginning in like the 1950s. So we now need to transition our body from being carbohydrate burners back to being fat burners. But initially, we need to manage the carbohydrates. So if somebody was stepping into fasting, I would first have them go low carbohydrate. Get your carbohydrate intake down to, first let's figure out where you are. The average American eats 350 grams of carbohydrate a day. If you're doing keto, you're eating 20 grams or less. We would figure out where you are, and I'd say, let's see what 150 grams of carb looks like. Let's see what 100 grams looks like. Let's see what 50 grams look like. By the time you're at 50 grams of carbohydrate, you will have worked through your stored glycogen, your insulin levels, which have been way up here for 50 years because, again, of the food messages that we received. Your insulin level is going to come down as your carbohydrate level comes down, and it's insulin that's driving those feelings of a drop in blood sugar. It's the transitioning from being a carb burner to a fat burner. If you exercise when you're fasting and you're in that fat burning mode, you have 40,000 calories worth of energy. You will not feel a drop in blood sugar. You will have a better workout. That's the metabolic flexibility that we evolved to have, but we've been in this carb mode
and water and go for a walk in the morning
for so long. Is that clear?
Yes, I think, and I would add, just sometimes when people exercise on an empty stomach, it's not a problem because the problem isn't so much lack of blood sugar, it's lack of volume and salt. And all my patients know that I really love salt in moderation, and I think people get dehydrated. So they just wake up, they're fasting, they drink a boatload of water, and then they exercise. And some of what makes people feel shaky is probably low blood pressure and dehydration and not low blood sugar. So you can definitely get those signals mixed, I think, logically.
Yeah, very true. And if somebody's fasting, replacing electrolytes is, it's not dry fasting. It's not that you don't eat or drink anything. It is really important to replace some of those electrolytes that you're going to be missing.
Yes. All right. And then just along those same lines, is it better to exercise fasting or fed? I think you just answered that. So you're a believer in exercising fasting, it sounds like, as long as you're hydrated.
I am. And I think the important piece there is just to exercise, just move. Like fed or fasted, it doesn't matter. I think we just need to move. Okay.
Cool. Another question is, a lot of what you were showing is pictures of these carbs, highly processed foods, junk food, crappy food. And when we consider the fed state versus the fasting state, are you talking really about that? But what if somebody's eating a salad with veggies and olive oil and a really healthy meal? Is that also that bad fed state, or is that different?
Well, it's very different. And that slide was really referring to the 6 small meals a day, the snacking all the time, and what our snacks typically had been comprised of in those decades. So the mixed salad, which sounds gorgeous, is still in the fed state, but your body's, food is not, our body doesn't recognize calories. Food is information. So the information that you're eating with the mixed salad with the gorgeous dressing is night and day different from anything that's packaged or processed or refined carbohydrate. Night and day difference, but it's all information, and it's how the body is perceiving that information, and then how it responds in kind. If you eat the highly refined carbohydrate, then your insulin's going to go up, your blood sugar is going to tank, and you're going to crash. The other meal is low in carb, it's high in healthy fats, it's got a brilliant sustained source of energy. But it's still a fed state, but it's the quality of the fed state.
And the rise, the spike, the slope of the spike and the drop.
Exactly. And you're going to feel every bit of that.
So interesting.
So your body's response is going to be different because the information that you're putting in there is different.
Okay. A lot of questions here about the ideal schedule. Does it have to be 24 hours every other day? Can it be 12 or 15 or 16? How do you advise people about a schedule?
Yeah, so I think again, starting where we are, one of my messages that maybe didn't come through was that we grew up fasting. We grew up with a 12-hour overnight fast. We had dinner, we went to bed. We didn't always have dessert. We woke up the next morning. It was 12 hours later before we had breakfast. We were doing a 12-hour overnight fast at a minimum. So from there, perhaps inviting somebody to maybe extend it to 16 hours, which is really kind of a sweet spot in terms of all those benefits of autophagy, working through glycogen stores, getting to be a fat burner. There are people who do crazy extended fasts. I think we get the most benefit of that autophagy after a 3-day fast, but you need to work up to that. Again, I would recommend going low carb, and then then making sure somebody's comfortable doing a 12-hour fast, and then maybe 14 hours, and then maybe 16. There's super flexibility. So maybe, whether you're traveling or whether there's times to fast and times that it's just not convenient. It's not convenient over the holidays or at a birthday or when you're socializing. But we don't have to do it every day, all day. We can do it 3 days out of the month and still get those benefits.
I heard a podcast with that fellow from Stanford who was saying that if you do it 5 days a week and 2 days a week, you can have a cheat, which makes a lot of sense for people who may eat out on the weekends and eat later in the night. But like you're saying, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect in order to work. It just has to be, it can be intermittent fasting, right?
It can. So there's time restricted feeding, and then there's intermittent fasting.
Okay.
So really what we start with is time restricted feeding. Let's eat within an 8-hour window instead of eating within a 12-hour window. Like we're eating all day long. So let's just kind of pull that back a little bit and eat within an 8-hour window. And then maybe eat within a 6-hour window. And then maybe build up to do 1 meal a day, which, for some people, they love breakfast. So it might be breakfast. For some people, they might like eating dinner with the family. So it's going to be dinner. There's many different ways to do intermittent fasting, extended fasting. And I think to some extent, we should be taking advantage of one of them, but we certainly don't need to be doing extended fasting. But yeah.
Okay, perfect. Another question that's really relevant to our particular audience, and you showed one slide about this, are there people who shouldn't fast,
Yeah.
people with cardiac valve issues, people who are on warfarin? I can take the warfarin one, which is, it shouldn't matter if you take warfarin as long as you're consistent with your vitamin K.
Mm-hmm.
And Beth, would you say there are other people besides the ones you said? So you said pregnant, breastfeeding, underweight, people who have labile blood sugars and blood pressures. But just if you have a cardiac valve problem, that shouldn't be an issue. Even coronary artery disease shouldn't be an issue. In fact, a lot of our patients would benefit from the anti-inflammatory result of intermittent fasting. But
yeah.
Anyone else you
Yes.
worry about?
Yeah. And again, I'm thinking of the slide where there were, 20 and 30% reductions in serum lipids and improvements in blood pressure. Again, because it's so anti-inflammatory. And while we're fasting, our body has time to heal from all of the damage of the day. And eating food and digesting food is very metabolically active and it produces a lot of oxidative damage and oxidative stress. So fasting is just a beautiful way to heal.
Okay, perfect. And during the fast, what is allowed? Can you drink water? Can you drink coffee?
You can drink water, you can drink black coffee, you can drink tea. Some people do really well with bone broth, which is a little bit of that sodium, but it also is very satiating. And again, that would be after kind of weaning off the carbs that we're so used to.
Great.
And that's pretty much it. And maybe some electrolytes. There are certain beverages that contain just electrolytes, like low to no carbohydrates, and those would also be appropriate.
Okay. Do you like Nun, N-U-U-N? It's an electrolyte drink with some sodium, and they use stevia as a sweetener, so it has almost no carbs.
Yeah, as long as the stevia doesn't have any dextrose attached to it, I think that would be very fine. There's also kind of ketogenic mixes that taste really good that I used when we were training for the Pan Mass Challenge. That's what I would use in my water bottle. So either mix of electrolytes, I think, is very supportive.
Okay, perfect. All right. Now we've got 10 minutes left, and there's an explosion on the chat here of new questions. So I just want to make sure that if there's themes here where there's a lot of them. Okay, and artificial sweeteners, does that interfere with the fast? Can you comment on, people are asking if they're restricting their eating, and for example, if they're vegan, how can they be sure they're getting the nutrients that they need? Can they add artificial sweeteners? What should they be eating for that meal? Eggs, etc.
For that meal.
Like if you're going to eat one meal a day.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so all right, so this is kind of interesting, and I play around with in my head quite a bit. One reason why we have such high micronutrient needs is because of the damage that we do with the food that we eat. Again, eating is it requires a great deal of energy, and it also produces a lot of exhaust. Imagine when we fuel our car with gasoline, it produces metabolic exhaust. When we fuel our body with food, it produces metabolic exhaust. That's why we have built-in antioxidants that our body makes. So if you think about it, the less oxidative damage that we're doing by eating, the more healing that we're doing, and the less those demands of, high, what are the plant compounds, the phytonutrients, the water-soluble antioxidants, the fat-soluble antioxidants. Our body needs less of them when it gets to a healthier state. To answer the question, that one meal a day, I say make it matter. I say make it matter, make it plant-based. So I would be having, for me, it would be a salad, and then I would have 2 additional vegetables. I would have a moderate source of protein, and then I'd probably have a bunch of healthy fat. So avocado, olive oil, whatever. But make it matter, make it visually pleasing, and certainly eat enough so that you are satiated, that you've had quite sufficient. There's no need to restrict calories. Calories don't matter. It's about the information that you're eating, and just make the information top notch.
So interesting, so important. Okay. And people are asking, what about meds? If they take meds, should they take the meds with that fasting, during the fasting or during the meal? Does it matter?
So that would probably be a conversation I'd have with your physician or whoever prescribed the medications. If there's supplements, you probably don't need them. Again, for the reasons that I mentioned, supplements are meant to supplement an already pretty awesome diet. So those you could probably forego and take advantage of the healing process that's going on. Because if you supplement, depending upon what it is, they could potentially break the fast. It's a metabolic fast, so anything that shifts that metabolism or those metabolics will break the fast. In terms of artificial sweetener, I think less is more. If it's a sweetener, it should be a natural sweetener. Although processed, I'm thinking monk fruit, I'm thinking stevia. You know that when you eat something that's artificially sweetened, you're still sensing sweet. You're still tasting sweet. This is why calories don't matter. You're still tasting sweet. You taste sweet, your brain is going to send signals to your pancreas that, ooh, pancreas is what produces the insulin. It's going to tell the pancreas that something sweet is coming down the pike. I'm going to need to secrete some insulin. So those artificial sweeteners, even though they're no calories, do have a metabolic effect in that they will raise serum insulin levels. And I think we need to be careful of that because that takes us out of autophagy and messes with our fast, messes with the benefits of the fast.
Great. Okay, cool. I'm going to take a pause to tell everyone, because a lot of people are asking if this talk will be recorded. So it's being recorded. We will post it on the website. It'll probably take us about a week to get it on there. And other people are asking to get names of your books and things. So Dr. Fung's book, for example. So maybe what we can do is when we send an email to everybody afterwards, and we're going to ask you to fill out a questionnaire, a little survey about the talk, we will include, if it's okay, Beth, your contact information. I don't think you're taking really new patients. I know you've been very, very busy and full, but shall we share that for people, or?
That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine. And again, I would have done an hour just on Q&A. I think this is great.
There's so many questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Let me see if, I think there were a couple others. Oh, somebody who is already underweight, doesn't want to lose weight, but wants to get some of the benefits. How would you recommend that they do that?
So I would make sure that that one meal is actually, I mean, and is giving them sufficient amounts of calories. That could be tricky. That could be tricky. And I think it would have to be done carefully. And the other thing is, I mean, they could also get benefit from even doing 16/8 or 18/6. You don't restrict calories when you intermittent fast. You just restrict the time that you're eating, right? Because it's that fed state that stimulates all of that metabolic response. So you can get, even if you're underweight, you can still maintain your weight just by being certain that you eat sufficient amounts of calories in whatever your fed window looks like.
Right. It's really not about the total calories. It's about how you do it.
Exactly. It's the fed versus the fasted state. And the goal is to reduce the fed state and extend the fasted state. But calories really don't matter. Calories don't matter.
Okay. There's some questions here about, this, and I'm sure you hear this all the time. This goes against everything I ever heard. I thought I was supposed to eat breakfast. I thought I was supposed to, eat. What do you say about the research that shows that if you eat breakfast, you can concentrate better later in the day?
40,000 calories worth of stored energy. Your brain, your brain is so alert, your thinking is clear. It's it's a night and day dramatic difference. And I think you need to experience in order to really appreciate it. But somebody who's doing any type of a longer extended fast or one meal a day, or even 36 to 48 hours, you would be amazed at how much energy you have and how much clarity of thought you have, because you're tapping into those 40,000 calories worth of energy. You're not feeding that glucose spike and insulin spike and then the drop in blood sugar. So you have the energy, and the brain loves the ketones to really focus on the task at hand.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So many people are asking for you to come back and do a part 2 with specifics on creating a regimen.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can convince you to do that, because I think it's very, I think everybody's buying into the concept that this is good for my body. But how do I make this really happen? Can someone really walk me through it? Because like you said, it's not that easy. So you have to first reduce the carbs and then introduce smaller fasts and then bigger fasts.
Yeah. So know where your carbs are, and then what do you replace them with? And then transition over time, again, going from that carb burner to that fat burner state. And then once you're in the fat burner state, intermittent fasting is almost a breeze, because you're already metabolically adapted. And we have to have had evolved with that metabolic flexibility, or again, we wouldn't be here through famine, through war, we wouldn't be here. So we are special, and we have the ability. It's just that given whatever agendas we were dealing with in the 50s, 60s, 70s, look at how the food industry has changed our diet beginning in the 1950s. That is some serious money that was put into how we eat, what we eat, why we eat, and it was just not evidence-based. There just wasn't based in science, not good science.
Yeah, it was really based on marketing.
Yep, agendas.
Okay. And we have some experts in the audience here. I invited several people here to listen in and comment, but Dr. Shirley is saying not to graze during the fed state. So during the fed state, to just eat a meal and not be grazing during those 8 hours.
Right, eat a sufficient amount to get you through to the next meal, which again, it's what we used to do. It's what we used to do all the time, but we were given the message that eating small, frequent meals throughout the day would help stabilize mood, energy level, blood.
So even during that period of time that you're eating, you don't want to be just constantly eating. It's still important to let your body empty out to have an empty state. And
the insulin has to drop. We don't want to constantly be in that fed state. That's a very inflammatory state for our body. There's no rest and recovery that happens during then.
Great. Okay, it's 2:31 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, including yours, Beth. So, but what I'm going to ask, Debbie, first off, don't stop the recording yet because we're going to lose the chat and I want to make sure we preserve that. The second thing is, Beth, can you end with perhaps just a description of what you do in your regimen? And then we'll stop and we'll be able to send people contacts and links to the website so that people can see this later on.
Okay. So what do I do? At the very minimum, I do a 16-hour overnight fast. And again, I mean, I wouldn't say that my routine is perfect either. It was much easier before COVID-19 for me to do an extended fast because then we were all traveling and my husband travels a lot. And when he would travel, I'd be like, oh, I don't have to cook. So it was a real opportunity to do an extended fast. The longest that I fasted, I think, was 47 hours. And having gone low carbohydrate for a while, it really wasn't bad. I did have to keep busy and it was easier if I was out of the house. But on a typical day, I will do at least 16 hours. I shoot for 18 hours. And as of late, I've been doing one meal a day, just going dinner to dinner, because it would be really hard and it wouldn't be very enjoyable to sit there for my husband to eat dinner by himself. So it's also a very personal decision. It's whatever works best for somebody. So during the day, I am very low carb. And I typically I never do more than two. Well, okay, no, I do sometimes do 3 meals a day. If you know, my girls come home and they make an amazing breakfast, then I'm eating breakfast. And I love breakfast foods. And I'm also not hungry in the morning. I never was. So I was actually going against what my body was trying to tell me, in that I didn't need to feed myself, but I was told that I needed to break the fast, that breakfast was the most important meal. So I did. And I think we need to listen to what our body's trying to tell us and not go against it and go with popular culture. And I do a lot of water. And so in the morning, I'll do black coffee, I'll do tea, and I'll do sparkling water. I think sparkling water is also a big help, at least for me, in kind of getting through whatever that looks like. And if I'm traveling, fasting is great. I don't have to eat airplane food. It's really convenient at times, I have to say.
That's so perfect. All right, on that note, we will end. And I want to thank